Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday.
Yay, Monday. A lot going on. So we found out that the U.S. did go forward with a cyber attack on Iran last week, so we're going to talk about that. And also today, new sanctions are supposed to go into effect.
And whatever the latest developments are with the migrant situation at our detention facilities at the U.S. southern border, all that coming up today on Rising. Good morning, everybody. The world is in turmoil. Krystal, what are you looking at?
Indeed. So we've learned some new things this morning. Although President Trump did at the last minute call off military strikes on Iran, we apparently went forward last Thursday with a cyber attack aimed at an Iranian spy group that was involved in those recent tanker attacks. The Washington Post is reporting that our cyber offensive, quote, disabled Iranian computer systems used to control rocket and missile launches. And experts seem to think that this is going to mess them up pretty good for a little while, but they will ultimately be able to get everything back up and running. Now, this, of course, is not the first time that we have hit Iran hard in the cyber arena. The most well-known example was back during the Obama years. You might recall we partnered with Israel to cripple Iran's nuclear development with the so-called Stuxnet worm. If you'll humor me this trip down cyber warfare memory lane, it's actually pretty interesting. So to pull off the Stuxnet thing, someone actually had to insert a physical thumb drive into a USB port at an Iranian nuclear facility, and that infected them with the Stuxnet worm. And that worm was designed to find its way to the software that controlled Iranian centrifuges, which were spinning uranium to separate out so-called enriched uranium. And once the worm got a hold of that software, it would sometimes make the centrifuges spin way too fast and sometimes too slow. And it absolutely destroyed a bunch of Iranian centrifuges by spinning them faster than they could handle. So it was very successful, but it also ultimately escaped out of the nuclear facility into the world, meaning that other actors could copy it. And that is, in fact, one of the drawbacks of cyber attacks that for a time made the Obama administration more reluctant to use them. Others can basically learn from and pick up your best tricks. So the Trump admin has stepped up offensive cyber attacks in general, not just against Iran. And as with all things hawkish, John Bolton has been an advocate for this more aggressive posture. Per the Washington Post again, he recently said about our stepped up cyber approach that, quote, we are now opening the aperture, broadening the areas we are prepared to act in. And this new, more aggressive approach is called Defend Forward, if you're trying to sound smart on the topic, which of course I am. But the Iranians have also stepped up their game after the setback and embarrassment of Stuxnet. Back in 2016, we indicted a number of Iranians for coordinated cyber attacks on dozens of U.S. banks. They also, troublingly, gained access to a small dam in New York and attempted to shut it down. They were foiled, luckily, by timing of some routine maintenance there. And more recently, Iran has stolen intellectual property from more than 300 universities. They brought the city of Atlanta government to a near standstill, and they even dabbled in some political disinformation of the sort that Russia, of course, made famous back in 2016. And in fact, just hours after President Trump last year announced our withdrawal from the Iran deal, diplomats for some of our allies began receiving malware courtesy of Iran. So it should come as no surprise then that after our own cyber offensive was launched on Thursday, the Iranians have reportedly stepped up their online bad behavior. Cyber attacks, of course, seem clean and easy. They seem bloodless. It sounds very techie and clinical, but crippling government or shutting down a dam or messing with our electricity can be very serious business. As Christopher Krebs, director of DHS's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, told the Washington Post, Iranian actors and their proxies are not just your garden variety run-of-the-mill data thieves. These are the guys that come in and they burn the house down. So what might the Iranians have up their sleeve for us next? And of course, the big question remains, what does the U.S. do from here? It's easy to think, okay, maybe we kind of de-escalated things by walking away from the ledge with a military strike, which of course would have been a much greater escalation. But this is not nothing that we're doing also.
I'm glad that you laid this out because a lot of people actually don't understand that. What does a cyber act constitute as war?
Right.
Does bringing down America's power grid constitute as war? A lot of people, if anything, it would have more economic damage and many more lasting impact than a military strike. Does targeting a U.S. military facility constitute constitute an act of war, even if you just take it offline? Does disabling a submarine's GPS system, causing it to crash, is that an act of war?
Right.
There are all of these questions. I actually studied this quite a bit. Nobody has any answer to this.
Right.
It is all in the gray zone. And that's why nefarious actors like the Iranians, like the Russians, like the Ukrainians love acting in the cyberspace. They can get away with so much more. You have plausible deniability, which is always best.
Right.
They
well,
can
that's
just,
true too.
right, they can always point and be like, oh, these were just some Iranian citizens. We've punished them. We've thrown them in jail.
Right.
They were the ones who were directed in the first place.
Right.
So there are so many questions that surround cyber attacks. And you're right, we're getting into very dangerous territory. We're reaping a lot of the infrastructure that we sowed. We are the world's leader in much of this stuff. And you're right, and to bring up Stuxnet, which is a lot of that stuff escaped, and now that China even is using NSA tools against the United States.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and look, we have an edge in cyber, as we do in all things, but not the edge that we have militarily, right? So, you know, someone like Iran can come pretty close to matching what our capabilities are, which is what's really troubling. And the thing with the dam is actually quite scary because that shows the ability to manipulate utilities, which all of us depend on to live our normal lives.
That's exactly right. Infrastructure is so vulnerable to U.S. cyber attack. Department of Homeland Security has only really started focusing on this in the last couple of years, and they have a lot of catching up to do.
What are you looking at today, Saagar?
I'm looking at a reality check at what's happening at the U.S.-Mexico border. There's a huge outcry in this country, rightfully so, about the conditions of border facilities for migrant children. Now, this is specifically about unaccompanied alien children. They're called UACs by the Department of Homeland Security. Many of them were sent here by their parents on an incredibly dangerous journey. I find it fascinating that there is no concern whatsoever for the conditions on the U.S.-Mexico, or there is no conditions concern whatsoever for the journey to the U.S.-Mexico border, rather than once these children are in United States custody. Let's take a keen interest into what actually happens on that journey. Girls as young as 9 or 10 are being raped. U.S. Border Patrol agents have told us, they've said us on this show, that young girls are being given Plan B and birth control by their own parents because they expect them to be sexually assaulted on the journey. Many of the women are sexually assaulted. Many of the children are sexually assaulted. We have cases of adults who are buying children who are not necessarily their own, sexually enslaving them, using them as a ticket to assault our asylum process. It is this hypocrisy of the highest order. And it is so concerning to me that so many people in this country are moral preening about the conditions on the border. And like I said, rightfully so. What is happening in these facilities is not acceptable. This is the United States of America. We can treat these people better. But the pull factors of our asylum law, but the conditions and the structure of this country, the way we have our immigration system, is endangering these children's lives on the way up here, and nobody is talking about a solution. All they would rather do is scream at the Trump administration about the conditions once these children are within the United States, where I can guarantee you that they are better off than they were on a Mexican train or trudging through the U.S. desert with drug cartels and coyotes. I would ask that many of the people in the media tell the truth about this. We've seen viral tweets. We've seen all of these things targeting the Trump administration. But in no cases have they ever discussed the fact that President Obama and his administration kept many of these children in the exact same facilities. And all of the shortages that we're seeing now are because the system has become unequivocally worse. It has been overwhelmed at the U.S.-Mexico border. The President of the United States addressed this in his interview with Chuck Todd on Meet the Press, which aired on Sunday. Let's take a listen to what he said.
The border is working out well, and the wall is being built. I mean, a lot of people don't like to talk about it. We're building the wall. We will have 400 miles of wall built by the end of next year. And that's hard because the Democrats don't want to approve it. We just beat them in a big lawsuit, as you know, in Washington and D.C. We just beat them in a very big lawsuit.
Does it frustrate you that your border numbers are worse than Obama's?
No, because the people are coming up because our economy is so good. They're pouring up because the economy is so good.
Well, Krystal, I'm not even really sure what to say about that from the president, because he's not actually focusing on any of the solutions in order to stop this problem. I wish the Trump administration would talk more about the dangerous journey of the people on their way here. But the conversation is just so hyper-political, and the fact that people are preening about these facilities without any discussion or real care for the children on their way here, it just really drives me crazy.
I hear you.
Yeah.
However, we have complete control over the conditions that children are held in our own
But we have control
country.
over our laws,
We
too.
do not have
Yeah.
control. We do have control over our laws, and we should be making an effort to also not only change our laws, but also to deal with the conditions in their home countries that are causing parents to think that the best option is to send their children on this horrifically dangerous journey. Like, as a mom, I cannot imagine being in that situation. But what does the Trump administration do? They're talking about a wall. I mean, whatever. Like, in some places, would a wall help? Sure. But not everywhere, and that is far from a comprehensive solution. On the other hand, they're cutting aid to these countries, making the situation worse, so you're going to have more parents who are sending their children on this horrific journey. But there is no excuse for us, the United States of America, to be keeping children in inhumane conditions where a lawyer went there and had to demand that 4 of them be sent to the hospital, toddlers who were unresponsive, who were being cared for by 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds. Like, that is something that we have complete control over and must change.
And any legislation that were to change that needs to also focus on United States asylum law. It cannot just target, oh, well, we need better conditions in these facilities. We need to stop the tens of thousands of children that are being sent here by irresponsible parents to our border, so that the American citizens can care for them in a complete and broken system.
I don't think it's fair to say that they're irresponsible, because I don't know what they're fleeing. I don't know what their lives are that they would make that choice. So we have control over what we have control over. We can look at what is causing parents to make that decision. We can try to work with those countries to address those conditions. We can change our laws so they make sense. But if you cannot hold these people in humane conditions, then you cannot hold them, period.
Well, I'm not sure what exactly the solution is, but I think that the discussion needs to be elevated to a much bigger level. And I know, that this is actually an area where most people can agree upon, which is that the asylum law absolutely needs to change, and that the detention facilities are horrific.
Right, and you've got to have more judges, you've got to have more caseworkers. Like, that's where the funding should go, because you can't have people waiting 2-3 years for a court date.
It does overwhelm the system.
The system is overwhelmed. That is true.
Yeah.
That is true. Next up on Rising, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo heads to the Middle East to try to secure a global coalition for whatever is going on with Iran.
Iranian expert Trita Parsi explains how tensions escalated so quickly over the last few days and weighs in on what could happen next when Rising continues.